On Monday night, we saw the spring debut of Kodai Senga and David Peterson, and both pitchers looked excellent. Are these the guys that will lead the Mets rotation in 2025? I'll talk about that more on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Well, we got another televised game on Monday night and a night game between the Mets and the Marlins, and even better, Kodai Senga got the ball to make the start. There had been some mixed messaging about when he was going to get his start. At first, it was, he's starting on Monday. Then we saw something, I believe, or at least maybe I misread something, that he was going to start on Tuesday with David Peterson getting the ball. We actually got to watch both of those guys pitch on Monday, and they each threw the ball well. Kodai Senga, of course, got the deference of being the starter for the game, naturally. And he looked outstanding. He faced 8 batters, gave up a single in each of his 2 innings, but retired the other 6, picked up a couple strikeouts, pretty much cruised through it. 31 pitches, 20 of them were strikes. He didn't necessarily have the best feel for his ghost fork, but there was a new pitch, a sinker that's going to get a lot of buzz today that people are talking about, because this is an offering that he can throw into the bats of right-handed hitters to hopefully get early outs, and also a pitch that he can maybe go to if he's struggling to put a guy away. I talked about that with Brandon Sproat on Friday, his addition of a sinker, and how he was struggling to put away James Wood. Now, this was a right-on-left matchup, but still, it gives you another offering where you're not just throwing a fastball down the middle and daring the guy to hit it, where they might be able to square it up a little bit better. Maybe they're gearing up for a fastball and you throw that sinker, and it just gives you that little bit of a different look that, gets the ball, under their barrel to hit a ground ball, and you're able to get, a big out. So I think that's definitely a new weapon for Kodai Senga. It's interesting to hear that he's implementing it. And also you're sort of seeing that it's kind of a widespread, thing around Mets camp. Like, a lot of guys are adding a sinker. It's clearly one of Jeremy Hefner's sort of go-to pitches to try to add to an arsenal and to round things out. Because it is, I wouldn't say easy to throw, but it's all about grip. Once it feels right in your hand, you throw it just like a 4-seam. So to me, it makes all the sense in the world. I know, not that I was ever anywhere near these guys, but I did not throw very hard when I was a pitcher, and all coming up through travel, I would rely on the 2-seam all the time. Like, the 2-seam was my pitch, because everyone would watch me warm up, and I was the guy that everyone on the other side before the game started, or if I came in high school in relief, that everyone's like on the edge of their seats in the dugout. It's like, man, this kid's not throwing hard at all, but I could locate and I could mix up my looks with a 4-seam and a 2-seam, and I had a good changeup, and I got the ball on the ground all the time. So I definitely am a proponent of the 2-seam, and you're seeing a lot of Mets pitchers pick it up. Kodai Senga, there was some separation between the 4-seam and the 2-seam. He did get the 4-seam up to 96, but they said that the reason there was a greater separation of 4 to 5 miles per hour was simply because he's still feeling out that 2-seam. But once he does have it, locked in and he's really comfortable with it, that 2-seam is going to come in only a mile or two below that 4-seam. And so it really does give you that different look that, looks just enough like the 4-seam, but has that different break to it, that different bite to it. That can really be effective, particularly against right-handed hitters. So you're going to see Francisco Lindor get some more ground balls at shortstop when Kodai Senga's on the mound. And as we move into the topic of the next segment, where I'm going to break down who is going to lead this rotation this year in innings pitched, I think that sinker could actually bode well to allow Kodai Senga to get the most out of his 27 starts, assuming the Mets do roll with a 6-man rotation all year and he is healthy all season. David Peterson looked even better than Kodai Senga following him up. I don't know if I mentioned it. Senga also threw a simulated inning after the 2 innings in the game. So he's up to basically 3 innings pitched for a spring progression. Same thing as David Peterson, who threw all 3 innings in the game. So these guys are both tracking at the same pace right now to be good to go for opening day. For Peterson, it was 3 scoreless. He allowed 1 hit. He struck out 5 in the 3 innings through 37 pitches. 25 of them were strikes. Looked like David Peterson of last year in midseason form. So that was really exciting to see. Again, I'll touch on him a little more in the next segment as we talk about who's going to lead this rotation in innings pitched, because David Peterson's a guy that absolutely could do that this year. He is the one healthy, the guy that was healthy last year, that's healthy in camp, that is guaranteed a starting rotation spot right now, because Kodai Senga is coming off an injury-plagued year, and Clay Holmes is making the transition from reliever to starter. The other guys that were healthy last season that were supposed to have that guaranteed spot, Frankie Montas and Sean Manaea, they're both out. So that was the biggest development from this game, was seeing Kodai Senga and David Peterson both throw the ball well. Behind them, Jose Quintana took the mound, struggled a bit, gave up 3 hits, allowed a run, walked 1, struck out 1, only recorded 2 outs before being pulled at 24 pitches. TJ Shook came on and got the final out of that inning. Huascar Brazaban came on for the next inning, allowed 2 hits in a scoreless frame, got a strikeout. And then Max Kranick shined once again. Kranick faced 4 batters, struck out 3 through 15 pitches. 10 of them were strikes. Again, you saw that fastball playing up in the zone really well. It's a tough pitch to hit. I believe he had a whiff percentage of 100 on that 4-seam today. He's just throwing BBs up there, and that is a direct quote from Jack McMullen, the new radio voice of the Marlins, who's a friend of mine, works with us at Just Baseball, and he's at the game, and he's actually a friend of Max Kranick. And I asked him about him coming into spring, and he said he looks really good, and he's now been on the call for a couple of his outings here. And I got that text, Max Kranick throwing BBs. It's an impressive mix when he's got a fastball that appears to be so dominant, and then he's got a couple breakers that are really good as well with the slider and the sweeper. So you're looking at Max Kranick right now, and I don't know how you can keep him off of this opening day roster. I guess the one way that happens is the Mets decide they only want one sort of bulk relief option. Granted, I still think that they're probably going to have multiple guys, because I could see a world where they're piggybacking that 5th starter spot if Tyler McGill does make the team. So I just think this team is going to get creative with how they structure their bullpen, and I feel like they're going to have multiple guys that can go multiple innings. But if they decided that was a role that they only wanted to give one guy, the sort of multi-inning, high leverage-ish reliever, Jose Quintana does not have any options, so he has a more inside track where I believe Max Kranick still can get optioned down. But you got to look at the results so far, and Kranick is clearly the more effective pitcher at the moment. Budo struggled a little bit in camp. I'm not expecting the Mets to DFA him, but I think you roster both of these guys because Kranick is going to be a weapon for the Mets. I really do think he has that capability. And I also think when you're looking at how you might creatively structure your roster, Kranick is a guy that I really like as an opener. Where you still have him, out of the bullpen, and you're not going to try to stretch him out to be a starter. But hey, you got Griffin Canning. It's his turn to start, and you got a tough lineup. How about you give him a little bit of a soft landing spot, and you have Max Kranick go out there and face the top of the Braves lineup, so to speak, and maybe get the first 4 or 5 outs of the game, if not first couple innings, before you turn it over to a Griffin Canning. I think that could be another way the Mets utilize him. So Kranick continues to impress. And I think he probably would have gone 2 full innings, but they wanted to get Tyler Zuber some action in game. He came on to face 2 batters, struck out one of them, showcased incredible sweep on his sweeper. So another bullpen option for the New York Mets. On the hitting side, the lineup only got 2 hits, so not much to talk about there. Donovan Walton and Jose Azucar, and Azucar said probably should have been caught. So rough night offensively for the Mets, but the pitching was very strong. Now, as we get into the next segment here, the question is, who will lead this rotation in innings pitched in 2025? We'll talk about that in just a minute. First, though, a quick word from our sponsors. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to get to 13,000 subscribers by opening day. We're getting nearly to that halfway point of 12,500. So I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe and get us closer and closer to that goal. Let's talk about who will lead this starting rotation in innings pitched. This is not going to be the staff that we saw last year, because last year the Mets ultimately found that their biggest strength was the veteran pitchers they had in their rotation, that they had humming along, and it was keeping them on regular rest for a 5-man rotation, leaning into the innings you were getting out of Luis Severino, Sean Manaea, and Jose Quintana in particular. And then, of course, David Peterson, who entered the fold at the end of May. Tyler McGill got a lot of run as well. And that rotation, did a great job. This year, it's going to be a 6-man rotation. It's going to be a lot more guys, I think, potentially mixing in and out of that rotation. At some point, you do hope that Montas and Manaea will enter the fold again. You're going to have starts from Canning, from Blackburn, from McGill. I wouldn't be surprised if you saw some starts from Brandon Sproat and Blade Tidwell, your top pitching prospects in AAA right now. The Mets are going to have a large volume of guys that are mixing in and out of this rotation. And at times, you might see guys piggybacking each other or openers and all these creative things, because the Mets are going to rely on depth. And I don't see that 5-man rotation crystallizing at any point necessarily. So when it comes to who is going to lead the team in innings pitched, I'd start and say, how many innings pitched is the team leader? Because again, last year you had 2 guys over 180, and you had 1 guy at 170 innings pitched. And that guy, by the way, just signed for a ridiculously affordable contract with the Milwaukee Brewers. I will talk about Jose Quintana in the final segment here. But I think that the innings leader for the Mets this year might only get to 160. You look at what David Peterson did last year, 121 innings pitched and 21 starts. If you extrapolate that over 27 starts, which is what a 6-man rotation would provide him with, that many opportunities, you're looking at 155 innings pitched. Now, can he go a little bit deeper in games than he did last year? Yes, but pitching deep in games wasn't really an issue for David Peterson last year. Kodai Senga, he got to 166 and 2/3 innings pitched in 2023, but he made 29 starts. So you take a couple starts off and you just expect him to pitch at a similar rate. He might not get to 160 innings this year. He might be below that. He might be at 150. And you look at what he's done in his career, Kodai Senga has been hurt in various points throughout his career. I think it's a little bit overblown, because you make it, people make it seem like he was nothing but injured in Japan. And he cleared 110 innings in pretty much every single season. So he was able to get on the mound and still shoulder a workload. But was it that full 160 to 180 inning workload? Not necessarily. He's only touched 160 innings 3 times in his career, one of them being with the Mets in 2023. But he was over 140 in a lot of those years. So I think the expectation for Kodai Senga should probably be that 140 innings on the reasonable side of things. And there is a world where he pitches more than that. And I think part of that is going to just be low pitch counts, but pitching deep into games. And that's where that sinker could be a really big weapon for him, because if he's able to go into the first inning and he's got a couple tough righties that he's facing off against, and he gets some early ground balls on sinkers, and instead of a 18 pitch first inning where he's struggling to put them away, he's getting early contact, and it's an 8-pitch first inning. Well, you just saved an inning of pitches on the back end potentially. And so, especially if you do that again in the second inning, and maybe all of a sudden you're through 2 innings at less than 20 pitches, now you're cruising. And so I think that's the world where Kodai Senga ends up being the leader in innings pitched for the Mets. I think if the Mets stick to a 6-man rotation and they don't deviate at any point, and they're not skipping any starts for Kodai Senga, and he is part of that rotation for the full season, I think he will be the leader in innings pitched, which might sound shocking for me to say that. But again, this is projecting health. If you're telling me he's healthy, he's going to lead the team in innings pitched, because he's going to be more effective than a lot of these guys. You look at what he did in 2023, first 15 starts of the season when he was still figuring out how to pitch in the big leagues, adjusting to the difference in ball. He threw an average of 5.4 innings per start. His final 14 starts, he averaged over 6 innings per start. So that just shows you what an acclimated, comfortable Kodai Senga looked like in the Mets rotation. If he does that again this year and he averages 6 innings per start, which is not an easy task. Let's pull open the old calculator here. 6 times 27, 162 innings pitched. That very well could leave the New York Mets. Now, I think David Peterson's path to leading the Mets is being the one healthy starter for the whole year. Because right now you're already going to see some missed time from Montas and Manaea. Otherwise, I would say Sean Manaea would be the clear-cut favorite to lead this team in innings pitched. And then you got Clay Holmes, which you hope he can actually do a full year's workload as a starting pitcher. But that's a massive if. He might break down at some point where he needs some time on the injured list, or maybe he needs some starts skipped. Maybe he needs to slide into the bullpen at the end of the year once he hits a certain cap on his workload. If this stuff starts to taper off, maybe the Mets say, amazing transition to being a starting pitcher. We don't want to push it. Let's have you taper off a little bit, slow down. Maybe they give him a couple weeks and they transition him into a bullpen role. Who knows? Who knows how this experiment works for Clay Holmes? He could just shoulder that burden and be fine. And if he does, that would be remarkable. There is an outside chance he does lead the team in innings pitched, but I think it's more likely that instead of getting up to 160 innings, that he maybe doubles his workload and goes from 65 innings pitched, which is what he would do out of the bullpen, and he gets up to 130. And maybe there's a month where he's out of the rotation for a little bit and he's on the injured list, and, kind of load management, or maybe something does pop up. Maybe again, he slides into the bullpen for the final month because the Mets have a rotation that's humming along and they inserted somebody else at the deadline and his arm's tiring, whatever it is. I just don't know if it's likely to expect him to get to 160. I think that's the target line. I think there will be at least one starting pitcher on the New York Mets that clears 160. I don't know if two will. And so that's where I get back to David Peterson being the favorite, just because he's healthy and he's there from jump. So I think he might be the one guy that actually does go wire to wire and make all 27 starts, in which case he'd be the favorite if Senga misses time, if Holmes misses time, because we already know Montas and Manaea are going to miss time. I think Blackburn and Canning are unlikely to hold down rotation spots for the entirety of the season. The frustrating thing is Griffin Canning is making the same amount of money as Jose Quintana this year. That's where I'm going to close the show. I want to talk about the fact that Quintana has signed with the Brewers. Did the Mets make a mistake not re-upping with Quintana? I'll go through that in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. There's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off, you can be part of the action for that fourth quarter comeback. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for that late game rally or I'm picking a player to hit that clutch three, I never feel like I miss my chance. Plus, the app is super easy to use. And when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Again, that is $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets Insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. If you want to be a Locked On Mets Insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. So let's talk about the fact that Jose Quintana is getting the exact same amount of money for the 2025 season as Griffin Canning. Hindsight's 2020, but I would say the New York Mets made a big mistake by signing Griffin Canning based on the contract that Quintana got. Now, granted, if the Mets did not sign, actually, you know what? I wouldn't even say that because Canning was always surplus. Like when the Mets signed Griffin Canning, none of us said, oh, I finally figured it out. They got the answer to their rotation. It was always, why did they get Canning? They have Blackburn. They have McGill. They have Buddha when you thought he might be stretched out to start. Why do you need Griffin Canning? And look, the Mets can be proven right on this. These are two Wasserman clients, funny enough. Both of these guys are represented by the same agency, an agency that has worked very closely with the New York Mets over the last couple of years. Clay Holmes also is represented by Wasserman. So the Mets, through that relationship with Wasserman, saw Canning as a guy that can get more out of. He's a younger pitcher. They believe in him. I just don't. And I just don't. Not that I don't think that it can work out, because I am always going to give this front office the benefit of the doubt until proven otherwise, because they did such a masterful job last year. And David Stearns, dating back to his time in Milwaukee and the infrastructure he's built there, has proven he's really good at this. With that said, Jose Quintana, I loved watching him pitch. I really did. I remember when we saw him in 2023, pretty much after the deadline there. I can't remember if it was right before or right after, but regardless, in the second half when we were watching Jonathan Arauz play second and DJ Stewart was a big part of the middle of the lineup and one of the best stories for that second half of the season for the Mets, or I don't even say the second half, the post-deadline Mets. It was a brutal watch, and the 2 days that I remember being, happy to watch Mets baseball was when, of course, Kodai Senga got on the mound because he was, box office. And then it was Jose Quintana. And I just, for a guy that been in the league for a long time, but you don't always watch them every day until they're on your team, to me, it was always so impressive how he had such a bulldog persona on the mound and intact with subpar stuff. And yes, the Mets came out and said, or they didn't say it, but it was reported that the Mets, I think there's negative metrics behind Quintana. And if you look at the advanced stats, sure, they don't paint a pretty picture about Jose Quintana. I do not care. This guy, the last 3 years, has found his way to be productive every single season. It's sub-4 ERAs. It's taking the ball every fifth day. Outside of course, he had that rib injury, the really rare one. But last year, took the ball every fifth day. 2022, took the ball every fifth day. When he came back from that rib injury, took the ball every day or every fifth day. And he just is such a solid vet. And I'm sorry, I'd feel so much more comfortable with him getting that spot over Canning and over Blackburn. And it's frustrating because we were sold this idea of, okay, the idea of Quintana doesn't make sense for the Mets because if he signs for $10 million, that's going to cost the Mets $21 million when you factor in the luxury tax penalties. We're talking about 4.25. And you factor that in with the luxury tax, a $9 million pitcher? When it's Steve Cohen's team, doesn't that make the Mets a lot better? I understand that the Mets believe in Canning and Blackburn. And so we got to just go into the year respecting that and seeing if they're going to be proven right or wrong. But man, is it crazy that Jose Quintana is making the same as Griffin Canning. I mean, that's just an indictment on the market that no team stepped up to pay him because he had a better year than Alex Cobb. He had a better year than Max Scherzer, a better year than Justin Verlander. He was winning games in the playoffs, and we all forgot about it. And all these guys just casually getting $15 million off injury-plagued seasons. The guy that won 170 innings and pitched to, a 3.75 ERA and got massive outs in September and October. That guy can't get his contract. I'm frustrated for Quintana, and I'm upset that the Mets wasted. I don't want to be too hard on Griffin Canning and eat my words because then he's going to be outstanding. But you know what? Fine. I'll reverse jinx him. They wasted $4.25 million on Griffin Canning when they didn't have to at a time where they could have just brought back Sean Manaea. They had gotten Holmes, gotten Montas. They had Peterson. They had Senga. They had McGill. They had Budo. They have Sproat coming along soon. They had enough options internally where they could have been patient for that fourth addition to their rotation. And if they were patient, they would have landed a much better fit. The fact that you signed Jose Urena for a $2 million deal if he actually makes the team where you could have just doubled that and guaranteed a spot to Quintana and gotten him, and then figure something out. I mean, sure, if you got Quintana, you might have had to cut Paul Blackburn and Griffin Canning at some point. But I just have to feel like there's some team that would have taken one of those guys if you offered them on the trade market, especially if you ate a little bit of the money, not a ton. And but like let's just say again, Quintana was 4.25 million. If you took Paul Blackburn's 4.05 million and shopped him on the market, is there not a single team that's grabbing him? If there's not, if you make him a $2.5 million pitcher, and so then your spend on Quintana instead of 4.25, maybe it's closer to 6 million. But you get Quintana, you move off of Blackburn, and you have a guy you can trust in that rotation that's a veteran leader. To me, it would have made all the sense in the world to bring Quintana back, but that dream's dead now. So you're pretty much set with the rotation the Mets have, and that puts a lot of pressure on Griffin Canning and Paul Blackburn to perform. But these are guys the Mets front office clearly values. They clearly expect to be able to get more out of them than the projection models or their just track records would suggest. And so we'll see if they're right on that bet. But for now, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. Stories that we didn't talk about. Brandon Nimmo dealing with knee soreness, but he's not too concerned, so didn't think it was worth a big topic. Starling Marte expected to get into some spring training games pretty soon here. For tomorrow's show, if there's no news, I want to talk a little bit about how the Mets had the two best players in the National League East with Juan Soto and Francisco Lindor, so we'll do that at some point this week. If you don't want to miss out on that show or any of our shows that we're breaking down the latest and greatest going on in Mets spring training, make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast if you're listening on the audio side. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. You can follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. I'm talking about Locked On Sports Today. There are local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.